על הניסים ועל האורחן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל האורחן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community. And today we're going to be speaking with Efraim Zuroff. He's director of the Israel office for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And he's in Jerusalem. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Great. It's good to have you. And what we noticed, we spoke a few months ago with other people about the last German convicted of a war crime in Germany, and that was Bruno Day back in July of 2020. And shortly thereafter, about a month thereafter, the Wall Street Journal printed the story saying the era of Nazi trials comes to an end. I mean, they said it flat out. That's the end of it. We're never going to see any more. And you're basically the Nazi hunter for the Wiesenthal Center. You've been doing that for about 40 years, I guess, right? And do you think that's true? Is that the end? We're not going to see any more? There is still more out there.
No, of course there are. First of all, people have to understand that because of the extension of life expectancy, a lot of people are living to quite an elderly age, and most of the people who committed the crimes of the Holocaust live in countries like Austria and Germany, where the medical services are quite good. So I sometimes also say that people without a conscience maybe live longer. So that might also help. But there's no question that these people are reaching an elderly age and they're healthy enough to be brought to justice, which explains why a man of 93 years old, who was a watchtower guard in Stuttgart, was put on trial. But there's one other element here that I'm not sure people are aware of, which is a very dramatic change in German prosecution policy. Until 2009, for a period of about 30 years, you had to prove that a perpetrator, suspect, had committed a specific crime against a specific victim and had done so motivated by racial hatred. Now, to be perfectly honest, it's almost impossible to prove that these days. But actually, because this change was made because of Demjanjuk, most people don't realize that. And it actually had a connection to 9/11, because some of the plotters in 9/11 were sitting in Hamburg and had no physical connection to the actual crime, but they had planned the crime. And the Germans were looking for a way to be able to prosecute them. Muhammad Atta, for example, one of the masterminds of 9/11, and they realized that these people could be prosecuted for accessory to murder, not for murder itself. And then two wonderful friends of mine, Kirsten Getze and Thomas Walter, who were working as prosecutors at the Central Office for the Clarification of Nazi War Crimes, said, one second, why don't we apply the same reasoning to people who served in death camps, for example, like Demjanjuk? And that case was the test case for this change. And once Demjanjuk was convicted and sentenced to 4.5 years or 5 years in prison, the German authorities began looking for any person who had served initially in the death camp, and later on they expanded that to anyone who served in a camp where there was a gas chamber or means for mass annihilation. And there have already been 4 successful trials. A fifth trial was stopped because of health reasons of Johannes Rehbogen, who served in Stuttgart. That's a camp near Gdansk, the first concentration camp built outside of Germany, a place in which 65,000 people died, were murdered or died of the conditions. And the last trial was also of a guard from Stuttgart, Bruno Day, who had been a watchtower guard in Stutthof. But
Right.
there are a lot of additional investigations going on. And, you know, journalists love to say this is the last, the last trial. And Lawrence Douglas is not a journalist. He's actually a very respected law professor in Amherst. And I think he's written a wonderful book about the Demjanjuk trial. But I would just like to remind him, if he's listening, that in 1989, Joseph Schwamberger, who is the commander of 3 forced labor camps in Poland, Roswitha, Melitz, and Przemysl, was extradited from Argentina with our help, I have to say, with the Wiesenthal Center's help, to stand trial. It was the first trial in unified Germany. And a person wrote a book, someone wrote a book entitled The Last Nazi. Well, that's a bit of a joke because more than 100, there have been legal decisions against more than 100 Nazi war criminals since Schwamberger's case.